had prior experience with. Your delight and happiness change when you emerge from a gloomy place. The darkness you've endured makes it appear different when you measure it, and everyone else does the same. It turns out differently than you expected, and you long time. It seemed like faith, strength, and unity were encapsulated by Joanie Lamb and Dr. Doug Weiss. The Christian world is being led confidently by a couple. Still, something lurks beneath the staged grins and televised lectures. Worse was on the way. Now, Rodney Howard has come forward with surprising discoveries that could alter your perception of Daystar, their marriage, and the reality they attempted to conceal. It seemed as though Daystar's heart stopped beating when Marcus Lamb died in late 2021. Over several years, Marcus was more than simply a TV preacher. Behind all that the ministry stood for, he was the one who had the vision, the drive, and the passion. Daystar was constructed from the ground up by him and Joni. They set out with little more than a fervent desire to share the gospel with the world and a vague idea of what that would entail. They realized that goal as a team of the world's most famous Christian networks. They were trusted by many. They were a model of resilience, devotion, and love for one another and their families. A form of harmony that was appealing to all parties involved. The news of Marcus's death wasn't, thus, only a devastating setback for the Lamb clan. As a result, millions of viewers were shocked. Staff members sobbed openly within the ministry. The impact that Marcus made on viewers' lives was expressed through the thousands of messages and donations they received. Many people felt as though they had lost a loved one or a preacher. However, Joni felt the loss more acutely than anyone else. In the blink of an eye, she changed from being a helpful spouse and co-host to representing a worldwide ministry that was in crisis. When she first appeared, everyone was very kind toward her. They advised her to grieve quietly and to relax while she did so. "Take your time," they reassured. For a time, it appeared as though she was attempting to follow the advice that God will guide you. With a gentler voice and less intense gaze, she made an appearance on camera, conveying the depth of Marcus's faith and the anticipation of their eventual reunion in paradise amidst their shared suffering. Audiences sobbed alongside her. It was honest, genuine, and utterly human. Things started to change, though, as the months progressed. As time went on, the boundless compassion that had previously been anticipated outcome. Many have begun to question Daystar's future plans. Would Joni be able to handle everything that Marcus had created? Did she lack the necessary strength, or was she simply not destined to be the ministry's leader? She found herself being scrutinized for every choice she made. Everyone seemed to be whispering, "Is she taking Daystar in a different direction?" and asking, would Marcus have approved? If she changed a program, it was as if she couldn't win whatever way she turned it. In the shadows, the strain, I can't imagine how horrible it was. Joni was juggling the loss of her husband, her responsibility to her children, and the survival of a large corporation. As a means of coping, her friends claim she threw herself into her work and rarely rested. However, the sadness persisted. The lengthy discussions, intense studio lighting, and artificial grins were just covering it up. A subtle weight had settled into the woman's shoulders, replacing the infectious laughter that had once graced her broadcasts. The Daystar was different without Marcus. His once inspiring charisma, booming energy, and fire were all extinguished, and Joan's best efforts were in vain. She could never replace that void. None of this was her fault. It was simply not doable. At some point, the ministry started to resemble a ship that capstan had departed. There was still an audience of dedicated viewers, but something had changed. There was an aura of silence. Feelings of loss, emptiness, and dread about the future all rolled into one. Even while Joni did her best to keep it all together, a gentle storm construction is already underway below ground. One that, in the near future, will blossom into something much larger than anything anyone at Daystar had anticipated. After Marcus passed away, Joni made an effort to remain strong. Months passed as she devoted herself fully to supporting Daystar, consistently turning up seeming courageous on camera despite the conflicting emotions shown by her eyes. The wounds from the death of her lifelong companion and spiritual leader never ever healed. She brought a smile to her audience's face whenever she spoke of him, and she reminded them that faith could mend even the most profound wounds. However, loss is an unusual emotion. As a result, its motion is not linear. A part of it clings, twists, and makes you want to grab onto someone or something to help you breathe. That is how Doug Weiss became involved. He was merely a well-known face in Christian circles at first, in a loop. A man well known for his work in spiritual and emotional healing, Doug was also a writer and psychotherapist. His many years of lecturing on Christian television covered topics such as faith, relationships, and rehabilitation. It appeared to be second nature when Joni and Doug started talking. What began as discussions about religion and healing evolved into something more intimate between two individuals from the same world, both acquainted with the life of a minister and having experienced their own hardship. Joni, according to those who knew her, started smiling again. Before everything else, after quite some time, she appeared to be lighter and more energized. Her loved ones thought Doug gave her the solace she sorely needed, someone who could empathize with her suffering without making her feel vulnerable. At first, their bond developed subtly, away from the scrutiny of the public and journalists. However, Joni lived in a society where privacy was fleeting. Rumors about her dating started circulating, and people's opinions were mixed. A few were overjoyed for her and told her that she deserved happiness once more. "I've been for a long time." They took her romance with Doug as evidence that God was giving her a new lease on love and healing her broken heart. However, opposing viewpoints were voiced. It was too hasty for them. 2 seconds have elapsed before Marcus felt like a betrayal to have Joni openly associated with another man, particularly one with his own tangled past after all these years. The internet was ablaze with remarks, some of which were rather critical. While others wondered, did she ever genuinely grieve? Others wondered, how could she move on so fast? Some people wanted to know, when did the news that Joni and Doug were getting married become a source of controversy? The story made headlines in Christian media, and each channel offered its own take on what happened. While some hailed it as a redemptive tale, others branded it as a scandal. Opinions are still very divided, even among those who watch the Daystar. Many of her admirers expressed their joy that she had finally met someone to spend the rest of her life with in heartfelt messages of affection. Once again, her detractors said that she was hasty in her love life and leadership decisions, and that she was disrespecting Marcus's legacy. As things stand within the Lamb household, had an even finer point. It was always believed that Jonathan Lamb, the son of Joni and Marcus, would take over as today's celebrity. His father had been a minister his whole life, and he had continued his work as a program presenter and preacher. Something shifted, though, when word got out about Joni and Doug's romance. With each passing day, Jonathan's airtime dwindled. The public took note, and many began to wonder, where is Jonathan? Why isn't he leading anymore? Meanwhile, behind closed doors, tensions were building. According to others, Jonathan had a hard time making sense of his mom's choices, not like a son grieving the loss of a parent, but also like a guy seeing the course of the ministry change in ways he disagreed with. Word got out that he was pressured to publicly endorse the marriage when he wasn't emotionally prepared. This decision was out of the question for Jonathan. Give the impression of disapproval by being silent, or expose his genuine sorrow by speaking up. I can only imagine how terrible it was for Joni. She had no intention of taking Marcus's position, at least not consciously. Attempting to stay alive, rekindle her hope, and experience becoming human once more. Unfortunately, she couldn't be that vulnerable in her environment. People looked at her every move, not because she was a widow or a lady, but because she was a public figure expressing faith. Her former champions were now casting doubt on her abilities, being truthful. Just like everyone else, Doug had his own bags. Even though he was well respected in Christian therapy, his detractors were eager to bring up his background. The instant his name was associated with Joni's, old grudges, past romances, and scandals came flooding back. All of a sudden, he wasn't merely a romantic. Everyone was looking at him. Many began to doubt his sincerity and his ability to provide effective counseling. Many on the internet wondered if he viewed Joni as a business partner or an opportunity. Whatever the reality was, it was irrelevant. A sense of perception has already settled in. The Lamb family's once private suffering became a public spectacle as the connection developed. The gossip squad included tabloid reporters, YouTubers, and members of the church. Almost everyone had an opinion, but very few could empathize. Based on moved on from a ministerial disaster to a widow rediscovering love. Like evidence in a trial, every photograph, every statement, and every silence was examined. The pressure within Dyer continued to rise. Workers mumbled in the corridors, uncertain of their stance. A few continued, devoted to Jonathan, who she saw as the embodiment of Marcus's genuine legacy. Some spoke out in favor of Joni, saying that she had every right to be herself and to lead. Gatherings that were formerly centered around sharing the gospel now held an air of tension due to the presence of unsaid questions. Could Doug be seen as a potential leader? Was there a shift in the network's trajectory? Is it viable at this level of separation? I can only imagine the terrible emotional toll it took on Joni. Her former advocates for her beliefs were analyzing her decisions at this time. She had grieved the loss of her husband, attempted to lead through her sadness, and was now facing criticism for experiencing joy once more. Interviews revealed her resolute belief that Doug played a role in her recovery and that she had prayed about the choice, believing that God had granted her serenity. However, the internet responded in kind, raising their voices in response to her. A symbol of debate in the Christian world, her story, which was once about love and resilience, became darker. It was as if everyone disregarded her humanity, her capacity for loneliness, and the fact that religion cannot satiate the human desire for social interaction. Still, the murmurs persisted despite her best efforts to explain herself. From internet forums to church pulpits, their volume increased. A woman who had suffered tremendous losses was smack dab in the midst of it all. The pain of Marcus's death has never truly gone away. Its form had only altered. It was no longer private tears. Instead, it was criticism, unending judgment, and headlines. The love she discovered, which ought to have been a boon, had instead become yet another tempest she had to endure. As after the smoke cleared, one thing became glaringly obvious. A tale of reconciliation has devolved into a tale of conflict. An entire religious community stood by while a widow's efforts to start over sown the seeds of discord in her family. What is Joni's? Their friendship had evolved beyond a simple romantic interest in Doug. Something far more fundamental was now reflected in it as a mirror. The conflict between embracing one's humanity and striving to be holy in the sight of an observing world, between seeking one's own happiness and the expectations of others, and between grace and judgment. A love triangle could have broken out at the story's conclusion, but that didn't happen. Emotions and relationships had no place in the subsequent chapter of Joanie Lamb's and Dayr's lives. Funds were at issue. Additionally, financial resources can have both positive and negative effects on the ministry. Dayr had a long-standing reputation as a world-renowned Christian network. Its programs weren't the only reason people believed in it. They also thought their money was going toward good things like sharing the gospel, helping the poor, and illuminating gloomy places. That impression was a joint effort by Joni and Marcus. It was a straightforward message. Real life is transformed by your generosity. People thought it for a long time. However, that confidence began to erode as concerns over Dayr's financial situation emerged. Crack. It began on a low key. There were some casual remarks made online and some whispers among contributors, but nothing major. The necessity of the ministry's new private jet was queried by several. Someone others saw that Dayr was less forthcoming about its programs than in the past. Then, as is typical in this digital era, those muted murmurs became a raging inferno. Posts of the pristine, white, expensive-looking jet propelled social media with the message, "Is this where your donations are going?" For an extended period of time, it was distressing to witness. You guys... Even in tough times, they continued to give generously because they knew their money was going toward feeding the impoverished or supporting missions all around the globe. It appeared that the funds may have been utilized for opulence. Then Joni attempted to clarify. According to her, the plane is essential for ministry-related travel, outreach, and message dissemination on a global scale. Indeed, such is the rationale behind the ownership of jets by numerous major ministries. However, the setting is crucial. I hated how the timing worked. Many churches were still picking up the pieces after the devastating pandemic. Money was tight for many families. A ministry that advocated for modesty and stewardship went out and bought an aircraft for millions of dollars. Regardless of whether it was intuitive on paper, the spectators saw something was amiss. Not only that, but the inquiries persisted. It all started with Daystar's typical financial records not matching up with his expenditures, which led to online speculation about offshore riches, huge sums of money being transferred between accounts, and more. Until now, no one had proven any of it. It was irrelevant, though. The harm is done the moment individuals begin to question the whereabouts of their funds. Tension was rising within Daystar. Workers with prior began to murmur quietly among themselves as they committed their lives to the ministry. Did what they were told really happen? If the gift were to slow down, would the organization be able to survive? Instead of discussing programs and faith, meetings veered into discussions about harm.control. A few employees discreetly departed so as not to be associated with the escalating scandal. The trust, the unseen bond that had kept everything together, was quickly eroding, even though some remained. The response was far stronger from outside the group. Once close partners of Daystar's, churches started to pull away. Guests who were pastors who had already been on the show turned down the invitations. Though they refrained from mentioning names, several ministries made kind but incisive remarks regarding financial openness. Yet their targets were immediately understood. Money given began to decline. It was gradual, rather than abrupt, a gradual deterioration of trust. Donations ceased from families who had previously sent $5 monthly. Huge contributors from the business world discreetly shifted their focus to other ministries. Furthermore, for every $1 that goes down the drain, another timely reminder that, in the realm of religious groups, one's reputation is paramount. Joni experienced a personal tragedy. The pain of losing Marcus was already with her. Then there was the criticism of her recent marriage. She was now facing charges that went deeper than before. She had betrayed the faith of her supporters for decades. Every decision had been made for the sake of the ministry, she said calmly but firmly in interviews and on television. She spoke about reaching out, growing, and expanding. But people appeared to lose faith as she continued to explain. The harsh reality of public opinion is that doubt is nearly impossible to eradicate once it takes root. Even her former allies were beginning to doubt themselves. They had no desire to look down on her, yet they couldn't deny the inquiries. Critiques on social media became more vicious. She could easily just present the receipts, right? It appeared like the story slipped out of Daystar's hands the more they attempted to control it. After all, why make excuses if everything is fine? Even among her close friends and ministry associates, things began to shift. Others, who had once proudly stood at Joni's side, now avoided Daystar for fear of repercussions to their own reputations. The conference invitations ceased arriving. Under the radar, joint projects vanished. Joni, who had always been in the company of others, started to feel herself withdrawing from society. Daystar, however, was subject to mounting financial strain. The contributions that maintained the network's operation. The essential essence of all, there was a reduction in every program, broadcast, and outreach. Staff reductions were discussed in whispers. Projects ran behind schedule. There were fewer live events and fewer new shows that viewers noticed. A palpable sense of calm descended upon the once vibrant ministry. However, the most challenging, not the most important aspect. Something substantially more significant was lost. Have faith in. In every relationship, trust can easily be broken. In a ministry, nevertheless, it is holy ground. Not everyone gives monetarily. They inspire trust. This is due to their firm conviction that the individuals they are donating to are trustworthy, modest, and motivated by a higher purpose. When trust is broken, it impacts more than just the financial account. The spirit is moved. Many of Daystar's longtime followers felt personally betrayed by his problems. They hoped for supported the Lamb family, stood up for them when they were criticized, and had faith in their vocation. They were confused about who to trust now. The Daystar offices weren't the only places where the muddled feelings of love, sadness, and uncertainty manifested. It spread nationwide, touching people in their living rooms, churches, and small groups. No, Joni, she did her best to cling. She continued to conduct events, discuss spirituality, and bring attention to the fact that Dr. was still actively helping others. A longer shadow cast on the ministry, though. All the accusations could have been unfounded, but the inquiries nonetheless managed to spark serious damage. Perception is frequently more important than evidence in the realm of public religion. At this stage, the plot encompassed more than simply a widow, a marriage, and a ministry. It all came down to credibility, which is something you can gain over a lifetime but lose in an instant. The financial storm transformed into a spiritual one, trembling the very roots of trust that had long supported Dr. One question loomed large over everything as donations kept falling and criticism kept rising. Do you think Dr. will ever win back the trust of those in question? When something happens in a ministry, when people quit believing, it affects more than just the organization. This is a religious group that has suffered losses. No matter how powerful the leader is, it will require more than just financial resources to restore trust of that magnitude. Words, honesty that can't be faked, humility, and time are what it takes. All that changed when the whispers became news stories. What had begun as whispers in the church quickly became a media frenzy. At that moment, everyone had an opinion about Joni, the events at Dr., as well as Lamb and Doug Weiss. Every major news outlet, podcast, and YouTube channel ran with the story. Anger and venom were prominent in the headlines. Amid tragedy, scandal, and the demise of Christian aristocracy, Daystar is rocked by scandal. Joni had long been held in high regard as a devout woman, a woman who gracefully carried on her husband's ministry side by side. The media that had previously lauded her are now casting doubt on her honesty. Her interviews were spliced together, reworked, and then uploaded to the internet with inflated music and catchy titles. It appeared like everyone was exploring further. Additional information, additional slip-ups, and further evidence that the idealized portrayal of Dr. wasn't ideal. The internet was a cruel place, after all. The war was waged on social media. In an effort to bolster their arguments, proponents and detractors alike cited Bible verses in the comments section. "Be careful not to pass judgment, lest you be the one to pass judgment," expressed one writer. Somebody other said that leaders ought to be answerable. What was once a ministry that brought people together is now causing them to drift apart. Feelings of wrath, grief, bewilderment, and other negative emotions flooded in with each new post and disappointment. Quite a few spectators took this as more than idle chatter. It hit close to home. Over the years, they had put their faith in Johnny and Marcus, even praying with them and inviting them into their homes through television, feeling the weight of the scandal that befell their ministry, as if witnessing a fragment of their own belief system disintegrate. Deeply troubling questions are posed to individuals. What hope do the rest of us have when they are able to fail? Who can one put their trust in among ministers? There was tension inside Dr. No matter how hard the workers tried, they couldn't escape the mounting strain. Undercover employees departed. Some remained, anticipating a calmer situation. Donors' phone calls become less frequent. Relationships broke up. Those pastors who had previously addressed Dr. kept their distance because of fear of being implicated in the backlash. The once hopeful network now felt dreary and unsteady. Joni did her best to cling. God was still in charge, she said as she publicly begged for forgiveness and understanding. But others were dissecting her every word on the internet. Her tone could be described as defensive to some and genuine to others. Nobody could have done it better. Both remaining silent and speaking up gave the impression that one was trying to minimize harm. Doug encountered his very own inferno. The events of his youth brought to light for all to observe. Many doubted his sincerity, credibility, and religion. The marriage, which started out as a means of reconciliation, had become the object of unrelenting scrutiny from the general public. Life became a sort of public trial for both Joni and Doug, and all of humanity served as judges. However, the individuals who had put their faith in them were the ones who suffered the greatest harm, not their reputations. Fans who had been there for a while started to doubt not only the leaders, but even their religion. It's one thing to stop believing someone. It's a different ballgame to have your faith rocked. Because their members were curious, churches felt compelled to speak out about the issue. Forgiveness was requested by some. Some cautioned against unquestioning allegiance. The harm persisted long after the sound had subsided. Daystar kept on air, but the ministry and the people who had formerly found solace in it had undergone a transformation. Unexpected trials have put many people's faith to the test. That is why the storm was so destructive. It was about more than just embarrassing gaffes or negative press. Faith and human frailty were at odds in it. The public witnessed the demise of even the most revered presidents. That epiphany made an impression. One reality persisted after the cameras had departed and the internet had calmed down. Time, honesty, and an authentic humility cannot be substituted for the absence of a spotlight when it comes to restoring trust, particularly spiritual trust.